Hey, 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 welcome to the Live Your Fuck Yes Life podcast with me, Anna Catherine Loy. I am so stoked for today's episode and specifically to have Gabrielle on because I have been following your work now for the last couple of months. I think ever since my friend, our mutual friend, Gabrielle,
Mhm.
another Gabby, introduced you to me. And I was like, how have I not heard of this human sooner? Because I feel like we are literally so aligned with who we
Mhm.
are and how we approach life, like bisexuality, E&M, and like talking about mental health. And while we have different professions and share in a different way, I'm just so stoked to have you on here. And honestly, I haven't had an open dialogue with another human other than my husband and within myself about E&M, about this space in a really fucking long time. And
Mhm.
I've been really conscious about who I wanted to have on to talk about this kind of stuff with more
Mhm.
intention. And as soon as I was introduced to you, I was like, this is the fucking human. So before we get into the conversation, you guys might notice we're on a different format right now. We're started doing these on YouTube too. So I'm going to actually be introducing all of my peeps while they're on with me. So we're going to do that quickly and then we're going to hop into the conversation. So Gabrielle Smith, who is here with us today, she, her,
Mhm.
is a Brooklyn-based sex and relationship writer. She specializes in looking at ethical non-monogamy, LGBTQ plus topics, mental health, and sex positivity from an intersectional standpoint. Her work has appeared in publications like Self, Cosmopolitan, Greatest, Insider, Bitch Media, and various others. And I can tell you, I have read so many of her articles and they're fucking amazing.
Ooh.
So she provides resources about ethical non-monogamy on her Instagram at by Gabrielle Smith. All of that will be in the show notes for you. But welcome, Gabrielle, to the podcast.
Thank you. I always get happy when I see people actually read my stuff.
Honestly, that's why I was like, I started reading your shit. You did a couple articles that really stood out to me, but the one about the relationship escalator is something that when I
Mhm.
first started getting into poly, I was like, this is huge. And this
Mhm.
concept of it. And I immediately dove into that. And I was like, okay, what the fuck else has she written about? That's been so amazing. And yeah, you truly are an incredible writer and somebody that talks about this stuff from a lens that I think is so rarely discussed in the media. And so it's so fucking refreshing, truly.
Thank you. Yeah, that's how I got into it. I was just like, there's no one who's like solo poly, who's like Black, Afro-Latina in my case, who's queer, kind of out in this space. So I wanted to do more about that. And then on top of it, like, I don't know, I think just the face of E&M and polyamory is very like cis, white, maybe like you've got some blue hair, some ropes going on, but it's usually in the couple form. And like there's nothing wrong with that, but I think it can be alienating.
Totally. And I totally felt that way too when I stepped into poly for myself because I've only been, I want to say like actively in the community for 2.5 years now. And I, before that, was operating in a monogamous framework. And I did enter it
Mhm.
from, being in a couple and
Yeah.
married. And also I'm white and cis. And while I am queer, like there's so many different representations, but in the media, you don't see that. And it's really, really frustrating because I'm sure that's been an experience for you. Like, was that really hard when you first started coming out and sharing that piece of yourself?
I mean, I've been really lucky. My parents don't care. My parents met while my mom was working for my dad in a strip club to like give that framing. So my parents are very sex positive. Like it's more so that's none of my business. Like I don't care than
Yeah.
openly embracing it. But I don't know. Once my mom did say like, teach me how to be a player like you, and I was like, that's not what this is, but okay.
Me how to be
Uh,
a player like you. Oh my gosh, mom.
yeah, I'm like, no, mom, no. So definitely when I lived in a more conservative place, I lived in South Jersey for 10, 12 years. I refused to do the math. And a lot of people, when I was having issues in my relationship, they were like, oh, it's because you want to be polyamorous. It's because you're trying for this open relationship. So I got a lot of that. But past that, like having worked in like either media or food and beverage, everybody's just like, whatever. Like half of New York City, the restaurant staff is actors and like artists of sorts. So everybody's just kind of like, oh, well, you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, that's awesome that that's been your experience
Mhm.
because I know that for many that's not been true.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's also the fear. I know a lot of people listening to the podcast and a lot of our listeners are like considering E&M and have been
Mm-hmm.
asking a lot of really beautiful questions around it. And there's this so much fear of perception, so much fear,
Yeah.
especially if they are in partnership, how their partner will navigate, if that will, negatively impact
Mm-hmm.
their relationship, all sorts of stuff. And I know I had that fear. I had all those fears, especially
Yeah.
because I came out as bi and polyam within the year span. It was
Mm-hmm.
just like massive, like here I am.
Yeah, they're like, okay, maybe she's just going through a thing.
Totally. Well, and that was what, a lot of my family members said, like with my first relationship, post coming out, it was like, well, this is a phase. And then like, oh, I met somebody else after that relationship ended. And they were like, oh, I guess it's not a phase. Oh,
Yeah.
oh, okay. So yeah. Has that been your experience? Like, what was your coming out story like?
Well, I guess I've always technically been in non-monogamous relationships. I wouldn't always say they were ethical, but my first partner, my first boyfriend, we got together when we were 17. He was like my first everything, first kiss, like first time I had sex, all of that. So about a year and a half in, I was just like, noticed I was looking at other people. And I ended up like giving someone my number at one of my jobs. I felt really bad about it. So I tried to break up with him because in the past he had said he wasn't interested in open relationships, which totally fine. But in response to that breakup, because I was like, oh, this isn't fair to you, that like I'm feeling these ways and like I did this tonight and that's not good. He was like, well, let's try this thing that you want to try. So I think a lot of people think when you open up a relationship, suddenly you're like fucking everyone. That's not true. In like the next year and a half that we were together, I had sex with 2 people, you know? So it ended up like just not working out because we just were growing out of each other.
You do
So
your late teens,
yeah, exactly. We were children. It feels like.
It doesn't happen when you're adults, because let's be honest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So like I was growing up and he was growing less, I guess we could say. But yeah, no. So my mom, when we opened up, she knew, and my mom was, pretty sex positive, just because she let me have my boyfriend sleep over, and she like thought we were having sex way before we were. And she was like, well, I'd rather it happen in my house. His parents weren't the opposite. Like we were supposed to sleep in different rooms on different floors whenever I slept over. So my mom knew, and she was just like, I think this is stupid. And she did have like a slut shaming aspect of it for a while, because I think she couldn't come to terms with the fact that I was having like a sex life and I was flirting with people and kind of finding myself in those ways. I think it just made her uncomfortable that I was having sex. But she never stopped me. She just like would ask questions, or she'd be like, oh, it's not going to work out. But overall, she didn't really care. My friends were like, that's Gabby. She's just going to be weird and do what she wants. And then, yeah, as I continued to go on, a lot of my friends are queer and E&M, which I think helped a lot, or were open to it. And yeah, for me, it's been really easy. I've never had anybody negatively react,
Yeah.
but I know that's not the case with everyone.
Yeah.
I'm just very lucky in that respect.
Yeah. I also think you're in the anomaly of having friends and people
Mm-hmm.
who were already in that space. Because while I haven't had a lot of backlash within my humans, like my close humans and family,
Mm-hmm.
there's been some like, I don't really understand this, but I'm going to support you, I guess, question mark,
Mm-hmm.
responses. I will say that it was like, I walked into this abyss of the unknown where I was just like paving my own path, which in some way I'm really grateful for, because I feel
Yeah.
like I was able to make it whatever I needed it to be for me, instead
Yeah.
of having these predispositions or having other people talking to me about shoulds, which I fucking,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't have a community of people who were a part of this. I have some friends now who have stepped into this space since I've come out. And that's
Mm-hmm.
been so nice to be like, oh, we can talk about this and
Yes.
get it, like
Yeah.
And it's not that like the humans in my life that are monogamous cannot, I can't speak to them about this and they can't understand, because relationships are relationships at the end of the day.
Exactly.
There are some things that you just don't understand, the like having multiple partners piece of things, and having to like share your time and like figure out how to even like come into that part of
Mhm.
yourself, or whatever that might look like. Or like some people might respond in the way of like, well, okay, but you have another partner, so why is it a big deal that you're fighting with this person? Just go hang out with the other person. And it's like,
Yeah.
because it sucks, and because feelings are feelings. Like, why are, when you have one friend that's mad at you and you're great with the other friend, do you just magically forget about the friend that's mad at you? No, like that's not how life works. So I don't know. It's been harder to feel like there's been humans in my life who I've been able to like go to, if that makes sense, in this way.
No, I totally get that. I will say I'm the only one of my friend who chose E&M as a deal breaker in relationships, or always lean towards it.
Tell me more what
Um,
that means to you.
well, I think, ethical non-monogamy is a spectrum, right?
Totally.
It can be anything from polyamory, where you're having multiple relationships, to being like, oh, you're going to Cancun for the weekend, do whatever you want.
Yeah.
But only do that there.
Yeah.
So I think that's important to know. And my friends were more on the monogamish, like having consistent threesomes, or I guess like a one penis policy, we could say. Because most of them are queer. So they were like, I'm not giving up my pussy.
Yeah. No, not getting that up for sure.
Yeah. And like when you're in those more conservative areas, either the men are afraid of other women, so they're like, absolutely not, or they're like what do they do? They're like, oh well, she can't take you from me. And I'm like, oh sir, if
Yes.
only you
That
knew.
is how it works.
Yeah. So I've my friends have always been like, oh yeah, we're having a threesome with this girl. We got on Tinder to do that. And when it's part of your lifestyle, I consider it E&M. When you're like just doing little one-offs and stuff, then I don't think it is. But yeah, so I've never had people to talk to about with it. I've talked to about it up until recently, when my friends have kind of pursued these relationships more deeply. But I've been doing it on my own with multiple partners for officially, I guess, 2-3 years.
Yeah, that's amazing. Crazy amazing.
Mhm.
I also think it's beautiful that it's kind of always been a part of just the way that you've naturally moved, and that you've allowed
Mhm.
yourself to step into that space, maybe more from a like label standpoint, which I fucking hate still, but like
Mhm.
I think I think the fact that polyamory, ethical non-monogamy, is becoming a little bit more socially acceptable and mainstream, and because of the kind of work that you do, putting it in mainstream places, like having it in Cosmo and Greatest is a fucking huge deal. Like, let's just say that. Can we just applaud that for a second? It's a huge deal. I mean, did that feel huge to you?
Well, when I got my first, Greatest was my first paid byline ever. My first article about being polyamorous in a pandemic. I
Yeah.
wrote a personal essay about how we thought my boyfriend got COVID, and like how me and his wife were communicating about it. But when I got in Cosmo, I was like, holy shit. I was really excited about that because, like, Cosmo represents a lot of things to me. Um, it's just been nice to be able to write about these things. And one of my favorite things about Instagram is I'm learning, like, I want to be the resource that I didn't have. I saw, like, okay, you could either read a book, or I don't know who's publicly non-monogamous, like Shan Boody. I
Yeah.
think she's the only person I can think of right now that has a bigger platform that's non-monogamous. And like Ari Fitz, I think her name is that, but that's all I can think of
Yeah.
in terms of like people online. So I've just, I don't know, really been happy that people, like, they DM me and they're like, this is like a breath of fresh air. This is really relatable. So I guess more than being in any platform, that really means a lot to me. It's just like that peer-to-peer interaction.
Totally. I hear that. I'm right there with you. It's why I do everything I do.
Yeah.
I will say though that I think having those media outlets is giving
Mhm,
voice, and like, cause I think about myself as a teen or even
mhm,
like, in college, I would read Cosmo all the time. I mean, it was the one thing I went to for anything sex
mhm.
related. It was like my place.
Yeah.
I would go on a plane, I would buy a Cosmo and I'd be like, okay, like, what are the things? Like, why am I having these UTIs? Or like, why am I struggling?
What's going on?
Like all this stuff. And I was like, I just want to feel more sex positive. I just want to like feel great in my body.
Mhm,
Like, I want to be myself. And everything was so straight. It was so cis focused. It was so all the
mhm,
same. And like, I didn't even own my own queerness for fucking forever, but certainly
mhm.
not my perspective around love. And I didn't think that, that was so wild because I felt such deep love for my friends.
Yeah.
And yet there was nobody talking about how that could maybe look different and how maybe you could also have intimacy in a different way, whether it's romantic or sexual, And so,
Yeah, no, if you wanna talk about that, I've just been reflecting on that a lot, like
yeah,
intimacy and friendships.
yeah.
Um, when I lived in South Jersey for, like, 3 years, I lived with my very best friend. First we lived in this huge house together, and then, like, that last year, we lived together on our own. And just close friendships, like, I mean, we're both bi, so we did try to hook up, but, like, it just literally tried it, never talked about it again, like,
Yeah.
really, just, like, never tried again. Um but, like, I don't know, we created, like, a little family with our cats, and we, like, emotionally relied on each other, and, like, if she couldn't make rent, like, I lent her the money for it, and she'd be like, "I'll pay you back," and I'm like, "Whatever." Stuff like that. Like, if she didn't have money, I would make sure she was fed. Like, I would wait for her to come home and make cheese plates for us to watch anime together, and, like, you can't tell me that's not a relationship.
I'm right there with you.
Mhm.
Or like the phone calls that you would make at like 2 a.m. to
Yeah.
expect them to pick up and they would do the same for you or like take you to the hospital if you're sick. Like
Mhm.
I have friends like that too. And I always saw them as I even called them my partners.
Yeah.
Or I was, outly to myself or to anyone else as non-monogamous. Like, I think the way that we box relationships into these categories of like, well, you can only have one person and that person is going to be your everything is just, it's wild to me. And I think some friendships in my life are hands down more important to me in terms of my time and energy than partners that I have.
Yeah.
And like that's because they've been there in there for 20 years or whatever. And just because we happen to have a non-sexual relationship doesn't mean that that importance or value of that relationship is any less.
Yeah, and I think a platonic intimacy takes away so much pressure as well. Like when I started doing more research on E&M, like as I've been going into this field more and more, deciding like what I want to do, or like creating content that people want or need, I've been really learning more that we have to look at the family structure and like all of these especially American ideals like of how our society is supposed to look like. Because when you're ethically non-monogamous, people are like, okay, but what are you going to do? Like, are you still going to get married? Like, they start asking about your future, which you might not have even thought about. They're like, how are you going to have kids and all that stuff? Because like the family is this capitalist structure that we've been sold and taught. Whereas like before the 40s, it wasn't even like that.
Yeah.
Before the 40s, everybody still lived with their grandparents, and like you didn't leave home until you were married. And like what you see in like within really any immigrant culture, like European, Asian, South American, is like that's still a thing. And the kind of nuclear family really broke down our connection to people.
Mhm.
And then I link that to capitalism, which like capitalism is, the source of all evil.
Completely.
Um, but that long tangent to say, like, we are separated from these entities and we're told these scripts are what we're supposed to follow. And when you fall outside of those scripts and you threaten the family, you threaten this like deep seated core in people. And that's where I think a lot of people have trouble with ethical non monogamy.
Totally. I also think because we've been so marketed to that nuclear, family being broken by multiple intimate relationships, usually in the form of an affair,
Hmm.
which is
Yeah.
people, you know, that's all we've been programmed to believe can exist in this world.
Yeah.
So it's like, you know, you're not just experiencing that additional sexual intimacy, but you're experiencing it in the form of deceit and betrayal and lies instead of in the form of honesty and kindness and mutual agreed upon, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and ways of stepping into it with intention, which if we're doing that and everybody is consenting, which we're all consenting adults, or at least
Yeah.
should be, then why the fuck not? You know, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that's always my way of operating. But I agree. Like, I think we're so built on so much capitalism and patriarchy and bullshit that like kills me. It just
Yeah.
kills me. And I think we're finally starting to break away from it. And I think this is another way of doing that, talking about, you know, E&M. You talked about the like multiple ways of E&M.
Yeah.
I've talked about this too. I had my husband Kevin come on and we talked about like how E&M is kind of like a big umbrella and polyam is like a smaller umbrella underneath the bigger umbrella of E&M.
Totally.
You know, there's all sorts of ways, but you talked at the beginning about solo polyamory, which
Mm-hmm.
I know is how you practice polyamory. And that is not how I practice polyamory. And so I would love, can you talk
Mm-hmm.
a little bit about what that is for you and how that's like existed in your life and what the fuck that even means? Because a lot of people are probably like, the fuck is that mean?
No, totally. Totally. So I choose to practice my polyamory in a way that like a lot of people call solo polyamory, where like I choose to treat myself as my primary partner. I don't really deal in hierarchies. My partners kind of mostly just get seniority. Whoever came first or is like the most involved in my life, or like who gives me the same energy I give them, kind of stuff like that. That's how I prioritize my partners. So obviously there are hierarchies, but it's not rooted. So I I don't plan my life, I think, in that typical way where, you know, you get married and you potentially have children, you move in together. I plan my life based off of like really baseline, considering what makes me happy. So for a while, or rather, I should backpedal and say, like, my last relationship, we were primary, and we were just really struggling in a lot of areas, but we did really want to be polyamorous. So the relationship itself ended up becoming really codependent, and we were very intertwined. We had like trauma bonded, all that good stuff.
So fun.
Yeah. And also we did the famed Don't Ask, Don't Tell when we did open up, which was really bad. And like Don't Ask, Don't Tell is essentially where you where you pretend you're in a monogamous relationship, but you are allowed to have sex with other people. You just don't talk about it with your partner, and you kind of hide it from your partner.
Can you talk about why that was bad for you? Because I feel like a lot of people,
Mm-hmm.
I never went in with the process. Like I was like, fuck no, like that is a hard, I want to know everything. I want to have the information as long as it's consenting from the other person.
Yeah.
Like, no, like, let me know. I want to celebrate you.
Mm-hmm.
Like mostly I'm like, I just don't understand that perspective in general. But I think a lot of people go in thinking, okay, it would just be easier to not know, but like, I want to do it for myself, but I don't want to know about your stuff, you know? And so
Mm-hmm.
implement this don't ask, don't tell policy. Can you talk about why that wasn't positive for you?
For me, it felt like I was sneaking around. And we were still figuring out how to like break free from like that possessive nature that you can have in monogamous relationships. Both of us weren't really jealous, thankfully, but just kind of like I had really bad anxiety at the time. I mean, still do, but it was worse. And he ended up like lying a lot when he didn't really have to. So I'd be like, you can tell me if you're with somebody and that's why you're not replying to my text messages or my calls. That's fine. Like I can deal with that. I want to sit in that feeling. But he was afraid of how I would react. Just like me having an anxiety response and him not wanting to deal with that while somebody was there. So like in the moment he would tell me, hey, I'm like with my friends, you know, sorry. I just like my phone died. And then in the morning he'd be like, no, I was with a girl. And I'm like, what is happening? Like it just creates this dialogue of deception that's not viable. And I didn't want to do it long term. And I also really love talking about my partners. If you're my friend, if you're my partner, you're gonna hear about my partners. And like if not being able to do that, especially like one night I had a bad night. I had a bad hookup with a couple and I wanted to talk to him about it, but like I felt like I couldn't. So it just, I don't know. I feel like it creates more space between a couple than like brings them together, which often is what polyamory ends up doing.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think the fear thing that you mentioned about
Mm-hmm.
scared, like I think that's at the root of so many of issues I've at least experienced in my own relationship, and also that other humans I've talked to in the A&M space of like, well, I'm scared, so I'm going to respond from a fear place, but also I'm scared that you might think this, or again, it goes back to perception or all these
Mm-hmm.
things. And like when we just embrace the fear and choose, like we're stepping into a scary space anyway, so why not
Mm-hmm.
fucking fully, at least is my perspective, why not fucking fully embrace it and just be like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm scared. I'm going to tell you I'm scared, you know?
Yeah. I think that's a lot of people have a lot of trouble expressing their emotions. And one of the, I guess, freeing things about polyamory is that everything is up for conversation.
Yeah.
You can always restructure your relationship. You can always restructure your lifestyle. You can always tell somebody how you're feeling. And the assumption is that your partner or whoever you're dealing with will be able to say, okay, hopefully reassure you, and then hopefully have like a decent response to it, like
Mhm.
an emotionally intelligent response. Because I did a post about this. Like, I think emotional intelligence is required to
Agree.
practice ethical non-monogamy, because you need to know what you're feeling. You need to know how to like regulate your feelings. You need to know how to express that feeling, and you need to know how to let it go when it's done.
Totally. And take ownership for your pieces too.
Yeah. Yeah.
I completely agree. I also think that goes in line with awareness. And I have
Mm-hmm.
noticed that in the partners that I've dated that have been very self-aware, it has been so much more of a positive experience, what
Yeah.
closed or has continued versus the partners that are so not self-aware at all.
Yeah.
Like, okay.
No, I will admit, like a lot of the women I've dated, like actually dated, not just hooked up with, I was like the first or second girl they dated. And it was the same thing, vice versa. And I was like, you go into queerness if you're predominantly dating men at first, like, oh my God, girls are so much better. We already know that.
Yeah.
Um, and then you're like, fuck, I'm having similar problems. They're just acting differently, you
Complete.
know?
Yes, I fully. I had the same experience because I mean, again, my coming out as bi was very linked at
Mm-hmm.
time as me stepping into polyamory. And so I think my first three partners, once I opened up, were all women. And I
Yeah.
was like, don't even want to look at men, don't want to see a penis. Like I want to step into this space and I want, but I agree with you. I thought it was going to be so much more like expansive and exciting.
Mm-hmm.
And like it was on a sexual front for me because it was like new territory, new excitement, but it was like emotionally, at least the women that I was interacting with were just in a space that was not where I was. And so it was like the drama was present and I just didn't know how to navigate that. Like I'm such a drama free human. Like
Yeah, same.
get the fuck out of my life. I'm just like, I
Same.
want it to be chill. Can we just fucking chill? Like,
I just want to hang out. No, I right before the pandemic, I dated a couple, and I think the first girl she had like dated, and I've been doing ethical non-monogamy technically like for 7 years, on and off, and I'm really good at stating my feelings and navigating these things. And my partner, he is something like 10 years older than me, and him and his wife have been doing it for so long that I have all these resources. And the two of them just ended the relationship because they did not know how to communicate with me and each other. So
mm,
we kind of just like all fell into bed, and I went on a date on a whim with
yeah,
them.
yeah.
And then like it just became this great, amazing thing. And when you kind of get into those situations without taking a step back to talk about it, it just like snowballs. So like she thought that I wanted a more serious relationship, and like he wasn't able to like divide the dynamics of like being in a potential throuple or triad where like there's like 4 relationships, you know, there's not just one.
Yeah.
And it was wild because I was like, I have the resources to have solved like these problems so we didn't have to get here, but no one spoke to me. And kind of the same thing happened with like the other girl I dated. Like she just didn't express herself, and then like our relationship was over and I was like, okay. And
Totally.
interesting. And I wonder if that's like a thing where like we make women feel like they can't say what they really want or like they can't disappoint people.
Yeah.
Because yeah, that's been my
I think,
experience.
I mean, at least from my own personal experience,
Mm-hmm.
what I've seen in my partners and also in myself, I think we've been so programmed as humans generally speaking, but I think especially as, you know, any female identified humans to really not speak up for what we want
Yeah.
and to just constantly be giving. I'm like people pleaser 24/7. That's
Mm-hmm.
like a recovering process for my own self. And I know early in the polyam space, I was like, okay, well, if everyone else wants this, because I also stepped into it. My first relationship was a triad. And
Mm-hmm.
I stepped into that and I was like, well, everyone else is feeling good here. So I should also, even though I'm not really
Yeah.
at this moment or this experience, I'm just going to keep that to myself. I'm not going to talk about it, which of course was problematic. And of course it led to me being like, I think I'm going to get out of here. I think I'm going to step away.
Yeah.
And there was a few other reasons. There was some emotional abuse happening and all sorts of stuff that I was like, I don't, nope, won't do this.
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, like you're totally right. The communication piece is so fucking important. And while I had the skills to access my own feelings and understand where they were coming from, I had that fear of if I speak this, then I'm going to, I don't know, like alienate these humans who I care about. And I didn't want that, or cause a rift in this instead of cause us to come closer together. It's
Yeah.
how backwards that is, because at the end of the day, when we say how we feel, that's what brings us closer together than when we don't. And sometimes that closeness might mean ending a relationship for what it is. Well, we can
Yeah.
do it in a healthy and kind and compassionate and conscious way instead of it being an explosive, massive
Hmm.
fucking shit show.
Yes. Or like in my case going, oh, okay.
I guess we're done. Bye.
I guess this is over. I'll cry about, I mean, I cry about everything. Like I went on a few dates with like someone who's now a friend of mine, and he
Yeah.
was like, oh, you know, I think we were probably better off just being friends. And I was like, okay, cool. Like totally fine with that. And then like I cried about it and I was like, what is the point? What is the point?
Why are we crying? Let's feel the feels. I'm right there with you though.
Oh my God.
I agree with you though. Like I think I've had it on both sides. Like I've been that person, and I also was the person who was left for no reason.
Mm-hmm.
It was like multiple times, and it's like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
deuces, I guess. Like bye. And like I think it's interesting coming into it as a bi person. I wonder if you've experienced this where it's like then those people then go after men and you're kind of like, was this because you weren't, because I was the first, you know, woman for a couple of people.
Mm-hmm.
It's like was that why, like you weren't ready for that even though you expressed that you were, you know? I don't know, I don't know if you've experienced that too.
Not personally, but like I mean, the first girl I dated when I moved to New York, she's with a man now, I think. And I was just like, oh, so like you just didn't like me, you know? That was kind of more how I felt, because I don't know, I think of men as like less powerful than women. I don't know why. Maybe it's like something I've like trained myself to do because
Yeah,
I did bottle service for so long, but like
that would make sense. Yeah.
yeah, I'm like, oh, you can, it's fine. Like you're not smart.
I want to pivot for a second because I've been
Mhm.
thinking about this a lot, especially with how much your platform has blown up and how much you've like really become, I think, a beautiful figure for
Thank
this
you.
work. I'm curious what it is being a person of color in that space, because I feel like that probably, I imagine, would hold a lot of additional weight and pressure in
Hmm.
a different way because there's so little representation in that space. Can you speak to that a little?
Well, I can speak about one thing definitely, is that like the space is very white, even in New York. I got introduced through my partner who's white, and my other partner is white, and like I have dated I have dated Black people and people of color. I'm just not currently right now. Pandemic makes it a little difficult.
I love that article that you did about your partner and how like that, I can't remember what the title of it was now.
Like my partner doesn't define my Blackness.
Yes, I love
Yeah, thank
I'll
you.
put
So
it for all of you guys.
I did that article because this had happened a few times where people like came after me and they were like, oh, is your like, do you date Black people, or like asking me questions. And I try to keep a very fine line where I'll show pictures of my partners and I'll mention their names, but I won't tag them. And I try not to just make it so people are invested in my relationships. And invasive questions like that, I don't like to answer because I don't owe anyone an explanation. That's kind of how I feel. But the polyamorous community is really white. Like, I don't really care what people say. It is. You can hopefully find all Black spaces and all, well, whatever space you're looking for. All POC spaces are out there, but they are harder to find, especially if you, say, like me, transplant into a city. Even already having some roots here, if you aren't a member of the community already, or if you aren't aligned with like sex and like all those values, you're really gonna have to search. So like it can be a struggle. So I feel pressured to like only date Black people or people of color. And I do really want to. I just think there are more roadblocks for people of color to come out as non-monogamous and date non-monogamously. So inevitably there are less people in this field. In this like community. Yeah, I'm like, field, no, I work.
I mean, in the work you do, speaking around this stuff, like I haven't seen a lot of people of color talking about this openly. There's a few voices for sure in the space I'm following, but like it's rare to see.
Yeah, there's like Michelle, polyamorous while Asian. There's like Marjani Lane. I really forget how to pronounce their thing, but it's lovely. They make really amazing graphics. And there's like polyamorous Black girl, and Kevin Patterson wrote the book Love is Not Colorblind. And so those are all people of color. Those are all Black people minus Michelle, polyamorous while Asian. But yeah, it's a mostly white space. And what I've been thinking about a lot recently is that the space is mostly populated by either licensed professionals, like if like sociologists and stuff, and sex educators, or just like women. We don't have a lot of like cis men who openly talk about non-monogamy. And I think like breaking past that barrier will like make it so much more open and available.
Ooh, you're making me want to have my husband on the podcast more.
Well, I think if you know a cis straight man who's willing to be on podcasts and like talk about it, I think it would help a lot. I did a Men's Health Live with Zach Zane.
Yeah, I saw.
Yeah, so he had me on because we wanted to talk about E&M, but like I'm in this bubble. All my friends are E&M. All my friends are queer now, or at least open to E&M.
Yeah.
And we realized we had to backtrack and start explaining all the terminology, and like people were like, yo, I can't, like, what? That's crazy. Or like a very common, she belongs to the streets, which yes, I do, but only I can say that. And I was just thinking about that a lot, but there's a specific comment that was like, they said, no offense, we need a straight guy to talk about this because Zach is bi. And I wanted to be like, my partner, who is a straight white male, will say exactly the same things that I am right now. But those men I think are rare because you have to question every aspect about yourself before you get there. Like when you're in a power of privilege, it's a double-edged sword because you have privilege, but when you realize that you have privilege, you have to realize all the things you were told that you are is a lie. So I think that's why it's more of a challenge for cis men to deal with it.
Yeah, I agree with you, especially cis white men.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's a lot for sure. But yeah, we're gonna have him on the pod more because
Mm-hmm.
I love having these conversations, and I think they do exist. You know, at least I've connected with some really, honestly, really beautiful and open minded, straight and also pan and bi
Mm-hmm.
white men, and it's been really really empowering to meet them within my online dating process this last year
Yeah.
and be like, oh wow, like there are more of you out there. It's not just my husband who's this like rare duck that I've known.
He's not like a gem.
Yeah, like there are, and granted, like there are also lots of people who aren't in that space, and you have to be like really, really, really aware, especially on dating apps, because it's like, what the fuck are you stepping into? Going on Field, it's like, no, 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 do not send me a dick pic. I don't want to see it right now. Maybe if I ask for it, but right now I'm not asking. So, but
Yeah.
okay, before we get into our fun fast questions at the end,
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to chat a little bit about this, and I feel like we got to have you back on because there's so many things I want to talk
E&M's so big.
about. And like I also know a part of what you talk about is like the sex positivity space, and obviously I think E&M allows for that, but I also know you've spoken about and done some articles around BDSM.
Yeah.
Part of your entering into E&M and why that has been important to you for your own story, or like how has that, brought you into the space, if that makes sense?
Yes. I mean, I want to talk about kink more, but I'm just afraid to because Instagram hates anything to do with sex. Like,
Or boobs, apparently. I got
boobs.
disabled because I post about my foobs all the time.
My boobs.
Yeah. And it's like from a double mastectomy, like from a I don't want breast cancer standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I share about it. But it's like, fuck censorship. I have such problems about it. But anyway.
No, and it's like ridiculous. But kink is a big thing for me. And I met my boyfriend a week after moving to New York, and not a week, sorry, 4 weeks after moving back to New York. And I think like a month after that, I was like meeting his wife at like a kink heavy play party.
So
Like I met her, she was getting flogged by her boyfriend and her boyfriend's girlfriend. Like,
oh my God, I'm so here for this.
And we've just like, he's like definitely like more of a, I don't know. I identify as a switch, and I have more like submissive tendencies, but my newer partner is also a switch. So it's been interesting to explore that because I feel like when you lean into these positions and sexuality, it gives you kind of a different lens and like a different way to perform in life. And it also like people in the BDSM community have so much more in terms of comfort, consent. That's more of an importance, or like spotting a bad dom or stuff like that. So yeah, there's so much about kink that I love, and I feel like I haven't even explored everything yet, but even just like being able to like start switching has been really nice.
I think kink has this really interesting perspective. I mean, you talk about play parties, and like I think that is a thing that a lot of people do. It's something I have yet to step into, but I'm very, very wanting to. And I know that we're living in a pandemic makes that near impossible, but it'll happen at one point. But I also think like a lot of people listening are probably like, I think of kink and I think of like handcuffs in bed, and for me, that was my understanding of kink, but I didn't really understand that there was so much nuance attached to it. And like that there's so much, as you said, ways of stepping into it where like by stepping into a space where it's a consent-based, really beautiful engagement with another person or multiple other people, and it's rooted in kink or BDSM, it not just allows you to have novel and wildly exciting experiences from a sexual standpoint where you can unlock things about yourself that you may have never known were exciting to you, but I also think it unlocks things about yourself from a non-sexual standpoint. Like you said, the performative piece, but I also personally have felt like it's been like this liberation of like myself, at a whole new level, like where I was like, oh, like yeah, this is safety. This is intimacy. Being able to be bound by another human and completely unable to move and be like fully in their presence and them fully take care of me. It's like, oh my God, like this opened, unlocked this like trauma safety for me that I felt like I could never do that because I was constantly feeling the need to be in control. Or
Yeah.
flip side, acting more as a dom, being like, my badass self doesn't need to be the one. Like I can do
Hmm.
it. Like, what if I, like
Yeah.
take control in this space and like learn how to do it in a really intentional way. Like it, for me, it's been a wildly empowering journey.
Yeah, exactly. Like for me, even though being dominant isn't something that is inherently masculine, like I've been like leaning more into that and like just kind of like the little ways you can be dominant because I'm like easing into it
Mm.
is really interesting where it's just like, oh, let me tell you each little way to move, like or like, oh, I've changed my mind, do this now. So like stuff like that is really nice. um and also just like as someone who I have sorry, I've never like had an orgasm alone or with anyone, and I know it's definitely tied to anxiety and the like, but I notice when I have a really heavy impact session or anything of the sorts, like I feel like I'm in subspace, like I feel a lot more able to access those parts of me.
Mm. I love that. I appreciate you sharing that. That's
Thank you.
yeah. Have you talked about that on like even the media and stuff before or not at all?
I might have. I'm not 100% sure,
You totally
but
should. I,
yeah.
I don't mean to put a shit on you,
Yeah.
but I think it's amazing because I
Mhm.
know so many people who have had similar experiences and
Mhm.
like, feel so alone in that. So I really appreciate you sharing
Mhm.
so vulnerable and candid in that space. And
Yes, and also you can be a hoe as I identify and not come. It's crazy.
fuck yeah. Well, and that brings up a really beautiful point too. I think so many people think that orgasm is like the end goal
Mhm.
when it comes to sex or any sort of sexual intimacy. And it's like, why? Like, why is that what we expect? And why is
Mhm.
that what we define as quote good?
Yeah. Or like also queerness just shows you like
Mm,
to bring it back like what sex is and can't be. Like to some people sex is an impact session where you're getting spanked. To other people it's not. And like what like sex can be just like heavy petting for hours. And like I think the more we start to broaden our definition of sex, the more we're going to have enjoyable sex.
I completely agree with you. I also think we are completely separate and individual and unique beings when it comes to what turns us on. And so
Yeah.
having something where it's like even a moment and an exchange where it's energetic, where we're so close to each other but not touching each other, like to me that can feel like sex
Hmm.
in the right context. I often feel as much pleasure in that experience as I do when I'm experiencing penetration or
Hmm.
someone's wanting me out or whatever. And it's like that feels amazing. And why do we not, lump that into the same thing? So I love that. Thanks.
Hmm.
Okay, let's do fun fast questions to round this out. You ready?
Yes.
Okay. So I know we haven't talked about this at all, but I like, how are you really doing outside of the kink and the E&M and all the stuff? Because there's a lot going on in the world. Like, how are you really doing?
I am recovering from like I think everyone's last week was terrible. Like last week was when the coup happened or the attempted coup. Um, so I've been recovering from a very sad and anxious week. What about you?
Feeling the same. Deeply on my period right now. So it's like the combo of that is killing me
Mhm.
and lack of sleep. So it's like, okay, I'm just like a functioning day to day, moment to moment person. And some days
Yes.
I'm on top of the world and can somehow function amidst this world life. And other times I'm like, I just want to die and go into my hole and watch Netflix and pretend like this isn't happening because it's
Mhm.
so
Yeah, like maybe it would just be good to not exist for a little bit. Turn my brain off. Love that. Ooh.
been a lot. It's been a lot of anxiety for sure.
Mhm.
Here with you. What about a lesson that this pandemic has taught you?
Um, it's really taught me that huh, the pandemic has really taught me that like I am okay to be being alone, like being by myself. Um, isolation has taught me that I'm okay being alone by myself, and like isolation has always been a big trigger for me. So I'm I've I've made my world so much broader in this pandemic than it was before, and that's been so important in like understanding who I am and coping.
I love that. It's a beautiful answer. Okay. Hard, like pass. Like I'm not even dealing with
Mm-hmm.
quality in a person when you're on a dating app. You're like, I see this. Fuck no.
Like whenever guys like are just like low-key misogynistic or like about gold diggers and stuff, they're like, why is everybody's cash app in their bio? Like, shut up. Now I'll put my cash app in my bio. If you want to talk to me, send me $10. Like, so that's, yeah.
Oh my God, I'm dying. I truthfully haven't seen that on dating apps, like people having cash apps in their bio. That's hilarious. I've never seen that.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some people use Tinder and stuff to like sugar for sure.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, like do it. Get your bag and everything, but like that just shows me that you're not gonna like any of the work I do. So like
All right. What have you been feeling the feels around lately?
My cat. I just really love her, and she's dumb and she's getting old. And
What's her name?
Lady.
Oh, that's the best name for a cat. Oh my God.
She didn't have a name for like 3 years, and then because she's an orange and white cat.
Okay.
And the shelter called her Creamsicle.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah, so we got her when I was still living with my family, and we were like, we're not calling this cat Creamsicle.
What is that?
But we never came up with anything. So my family, like they moved to Ohio, and like I kept a cat, and people kept coming over like, what is your cat's name? So I was like, her name's Lady. She answers to that. So yeah.
There you go. I love it. Okay. And last question. What does it mean to you to live your fuck yes life?
Oh, it's just like being very genuine to myself, like knowing that I can make my life exactly what I want it to be. Like I'm a freelancer, I'm ethically non-monogamous, I am queer, bi, pan, like literally all the ambiguity.
Yeah.
Like I can do anything I want at any moment, and like I live in New York. So just doing whatever I want and like leading a life that like is akin to my values.
I think that's the lesson here, honestly. Like, I think that's a beautiful answer, and also the lesson of this, because whether you're listening to this and you're in the E&M space or not, right? At the heart of this, I hope what you've taken away from this conversation is that it's all just about being who you are. It's all about stepping into your fuck yes self. And maybe your fuck yes self is consciously monogamous, and that's the integrity of your values. And maybe your fuck yes self is wildly sex positive and in the kink space, but within your monogamous space. Or maybe just maybe you have the potential and the perspective and the life world of view of loving multiple humans. And maybe you're queer, whatever it is, and whoever you are, owning that for yourself and stepping into that and saying, this is how I want to live my life because this is what feels good. As you said in the beginning, like polyam, because I want to do what feels good to myself, and I want to be my primary. Like, what a beautiful concept that we can all take away for ourselves, whether we are polyamorous or not, right? What would it look like to be your own primary, to love yourself, to step into this space and say, I want to just live my life with intention, and then things, relationships, life, work, whatever the fuck, in accordance with that, right? Like, to me, that has been such a beautiful path for my own self. And I really appreciate you reflecting that, because I think that's something we can all take away no matter how we identify. So appreciate you hard.
Yes,
okay.
Thank you.
How can everyone listening or watching find you, connect with you, post this? It'll all be in the show notes for y'all, but yeah, let everyone know.
So I make content for folks interested in ethical non-monogamy and polyamory, also like mental health and racial justice stuff on Instagram at by Gabrielle Smith, BY Gabrielle Smith. And on Twitter, I just complain a lot at Gabrielle A. Smith because of the character limit.
Yeah.
So
I love it.
And then anything else is by GabrielleSmith.com. You can book peer support sessions and talk to me, or just see all my writing.
I love it. Thank you so much. And make sure to follow her. Getting people in your, whether you are, like I said, whether you are polyamorous or not, getting people in your feed who are different than you, who approach life in different ways. That's how we evolve. That's how we constantly learn. That's how we can
Mm-hmm.
maintain and our flexibility of our mind. And that, to me, that's what living your fuck yes life is all about. So I appreciate you being here. This has been such an amazing conversation. And yeah, you're the
Thank
best.
you so much.
Amazing.